Hopefully that's all showing up now.
It's showing up, yes.
Okay. So the title that I've given my presentation today is Patterns of Manifestation, because the Cayce readings mention the word patterns a lot. And for me, that's something that I feel as though I've been working with for a long, long time. And my wife certainly worked with for a long, long time, seeing her clients as a kinesiologist, because they were forever presenting with life patterns that they wanted to alter in some way. So my questions were, as we build our lives, what influences shape who we become or what we create? Do we control our own destiny, or are greater forces at play behind the scenes? Okay. And I would just like to offer an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge and extend my appreciation for the Dja Dja Wurrung people, the traditional custodians of the land that I am speaking with you from today. I pay my respects to leaders and elders, past, present, and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture, and the hopes of all Dja Dja Wurrung people. I express my gratitude in the sharing of this land, my sorrow for the personal, spiritual, and cultural costs of that sharing, and hope that we may move forward together in harmony and in a spirit of healing. Because the Aboriginal people of this land have been here for over 60,000 years before white people arrived. Now, I'm going to be sharing some stories. Some of them are my stories, some of them are other people's stories that have had a profound influence on me. And I do apologise to those of you who are tuned in from Australia, because you've probably heard a lot of these stories before, because I've shared them before, and I've put them in our Australian newsletter before as well. But anyhow, they're important stories, and I feel they should be heard by as many people as possible. So the first story is honouring the past, Maria, that's my wife, her New York experience. In the early 1970s, my wife Maria was working as a nursing aide at the Heidelberg Repatriation Hospital in Melbourne. She was living in the nurses' quarters adjacent to the hospital. One night, she had a vivid dream. She was sitting at a round glass-topped table in an unfamiliar kitchen. On the other side of the table was a woman with her very young daughter on her knee. She was in conversation with them and knew them in the dream, but not in her waking life. The other significant image was the kitchen benches on all sides had very brightly coloured tiles as a splashback, with Mexican motifs. She was so intrigued by this dream that she shared it with her nursing friends at breakfast the following morning. Some months later, Maria was contacted by a former nursing colleague who had returned to Australia after 12 months working in New York as a nanny. She suggested to Maria that she should apply to work for her former employer, an Australian woman married to a US man, as she preferred Australian girls as nannies for her 2 children, and she felt the position would be perfect for Maria. So Maria applied for the job, was hired for a 12-month term, and felt on arrival in Manhattan an intense but also disturbing feeling of, I'm home. She caught a cab to her employer's apartment near Central Park and sat down in the kitchen, only to recognise that the woman and her daughter sitting opposite, the glass-topped table and the coloured tiles on the splashbacks were exactly as she had foreseen in her dream of many months prior, before she even knew she would travel to New York. It has been suggested that most precognitive dreams show conditions that would likely occur if your life continued unchanging on its present course. But here was a situation that could not have been predicted in any way. Maria spent 4 years working in New York, but returned to Australia to give birth to her son, Jason. Her spiritual and psychic perceptions were opened. She had many amazing life-changing experiences, and memories of a past life on Long Island, New York, about 40 years prior, were revealed to her. This entire episode of her life was definitely preordained. And she told me stories of how the first time she visited Long Island, driving with her then boyfriend, who was Jason's father, that she was able to predict what was going to be around the next corner. And they would come around the corner, and there exactly was the building that Maria said would be there on the left-hand side of the road. She'd never been to Long Island before. And her boyfriend, Joe, used to say, "Oh, you freak me out sometimes, Maria." And she went to a party in a mansion out on Long Island, a very old building. And she knew in this huge building what was behind every door, on the ground floor, on the next floor up. She knew what was a bathroom, she knew what was a bedroom, because she knew she'd been there before. So that was her memories of Long Island. And even, she said, coming in on the train from Long Island back into Manhattan, she said the whole skyline of Manhattan from that train line looked so familiar, even though she'd never been there before. And the Edgar Cayce reading suggests that nothing of importance happens to us without first being foreshadowed in a dream. And in reading 136-7, for dreams are that of which the subconscious is made, for any conditions ever becoming reality is first dreamed. Another story, honouring the past, the humble litter collector. I was in Virginia Beach for ARE Congress in June 2013, and for exercise I walked along Atlantic Avenue early every morning during my stay. Many mornings I noticed an older man carrying a plastic bag, and as he walked, he collected bottles, cans and papers littering the street. One morning I greeted him with my usual "good morning," but also remarked, "That must be a never-ending task." He smiled and responded, "Yes, but at least I have job security." That response has had a profound effect on me, and although I did not see him on my morning walks in later years in Virginia Beach, I kept thinking about this man's amazing attitude and his dedication to such a thankless task in the service of others. And I'm sure those of you that have been to Virginia Beach would recognise the King Neptune statue, massive statue that's on the boardwalk down there. I gradually became aware of the fact that we each are employees of God as we endeavour to render loving service to all those we encounter in our lives. There is no monetary reward for our service, but as with the litter collector, each of us has job security for life. In an age when tenure of employment and even finding a satisfactory form of meaningful employment is increasingly difficult for many of us, the idea of finding permanent employment in God's service is a great comfort. The soul of each individual is a portion then of the whole, with the birthright of creative forces to become a co-creator with the Father, a co-labourer with him. I'm reading 1549-1. So what else do the Ed Cayce readings tell us about service to others? Do not be afraid of giving self in service if the ideal is correct. If it is for selfish motives, for aggrandizement, for obtaining a hold to be used in an underhand manner, beware. If it is that the glory of truth may be made manifest, spend it all, whether self, mind, body, or the worldly means, whether in labour or in the coin of the realm. Reading 1957-1. Thy prayer should ever be, Lord, here am I. Use me in the way thou seest, that I may be the greater channel of blessings to those I meet day by day. For until ye are willing to lose thyself in service, ye may not indeed know that peace which he has promised to give to all. Reading 1599-1. And it is not by might, nor by some great deed, nor by something that may be spoken of by others, but as he has given so oft, it is here a little, there a little, line upon line, precept upon precept, sowing the fruits of the Spirit, leaving the fruition of same to God. Reading 1877-2. And how can I best use my abilities at the present time to best serve humanity? By filling to the best possible purpose and ability that place, that niche the body, mind and soul occupies, being the best husband, the best neighbour, the best friend to each and every individual the body meets. Reading 99-8. And finally, know, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. If each soul would understand what that means, he may pattern his life, his associations, his dealings with his fellow man in such a way and manner as to make not only harmony and peace within his own home, his own mind, but all who contact the body entity will know same for the beauty of his dealings with his fellow man in every way and manner. Man should learn, it is God that giveth the increase. Reading 257-182. Okay, honouring the past. Now this is a story from my wife Maria in her practice as a kinesiologist that she has shared, and it's titled Conception and Misconceptions. And this is her story. In my 30 plus years of practice as a kinesiologist, I have assisted many clients who have experienced difficulty in achieving and maintaining a pregnancy. When I have my initial consultation with such clients, I see an angelic figure standing in my consultancy room, either holding a baby or with no baby. And with no baby, they usually had their arms crossed, which has accurately symbolised the outcome of my work with the client. I have always shared that vision with them. Sometimes the angel will indicate the likelihood of additional children and even the appearance and personality of the child. Twice the angel has shown twins, which did eventuate. On one occasion, the angel was holding half a child, and I knew that this was not a 50-50 chance of a child, but the child was going to be disabled, most likely Down's syndrome. This client was in her early 40s, had already had a daughter through IVF, and the procedure had left her with a very delicate constitution, and she didn't want to undergo this again. However, she was desperate for a son. In this particular case, considering my client's fragile state, I communicated to the angel, I can't tell her about this. The angel insisted I tell her, but I just couldn't share this with her. The angel then said, just tell her that she will be given a choice about having a son, but first she needs to heal and strengthen her body. She also needs to understand why she wants a son. Over the next several months, we worked to achieve the healing of her physical and emotional states. In one session, we went to 2 past lives where she was childless and unable to bear an heir for their substantial estates. She acknowledged then that her need for a son in this life was due to her husband being the last carrier of the family name. And interestingly, her husband had an only brother who was gay and not going to have any children. So the same life pattern was being repeated. Over time, her health improved and I didn't hear from her for about 6 months. She called me one day to share with me an experience that had profoundly affected her. She was awake, and an angel came to her and was holding a baby. The angel told her, "This boy needs a loving family, and you have first preference to have him. He has Downs, but there is another family who will happily accept him and love him, and it is okay to say no." The angel added, "Think about this and let us know your answer." She was initially very excited about having a boy, but then realised her husband only loved perfect things and that he would reject such a child. With sadness, her answer to the angel had to be no. And the Cayce reading states, ovulation is a law of nature. Conception is a law of God. Reading 457-11. Now, it's interesting that in 1989, Maria and I were attending the New Year's Eve conference in Virginia Beach at the ARE, and we were staying in the hotel 10 blocks south of the ARE. And one evening we're in the hotel room and Maria said, "Oh, there's someone here." And so she tuned in and looked around and she said, oh no, she said, "We've got everyone in our family that we want. We don't need any more children," because we already had 3 children. And she said, "Look, there's lots of lovely spiritual families here in Virginia Beach that you can go with. We don't need anyone else. We've finished our family." Anyhow, so that night she had a dream. And in the dream, she was in a large room and there was all these doors. And she would open a door and there would be this little 2-year-old blonde-headed boy looking up at her. And she'd shut the door, open another door, same little boy, same looking up, shut the door. Happened with about 5 different doors in this room. He was behind every door. And obviously he didn't take no for an answer because he followed us home back to Australia, and a few months later she was pregnant with Alex, who was absolutely desperate to be part of our family. Sorry, it's just a bit difficult talking about Maria in that way. But the interesting thing about Alex is that he is my father reincarnated, who died 6 years before Alex was born. And the other interesting one was our granddaughter, Hayley. When she was 3.5, about 18 months ago, we'd had her stay with us, and we were taking her back to her mum's house, and she was chattering away to Maria in the car, and all of a sudden she was quiet for a while and then just said, "You know, I was your grandmother once when I was an adult, but now I'm just Hayley." Which was very interesting because Maria asked her guides when Hayley was born, "Do I know this soul?" And she was told, "She's your grandmother." And yet, 2 months later, we asked Hayley about that. She had no recollection of it at all. She must have just had a lucid moment where she tuned into who she'd been in a past life. So it's interesting how, we look at honouring the past, but creating the future, just how the past and the future overlap because of these family groups of people reincarnating in the same groups. The next story, honouring the past, the architect within. In 1989, my wife Maria and I and our 3 children, Alex hadn't been born then, he was born in 1990, were living in a very small cottage in Creswick, and another child would soon be on his way. We had been out for the day, and as I drove our car down the side of the cottage to park in the rear yard, I had an awareness that the driveway actually continued up the hill to our new house on the vacant 3/4 acre block behind the cottage. There was no driveway, but I just knew that it was there as I pulled up in the car. It felt so real that I exclaimed to Maria about it, and we realised it was a sign to commence designing a new, larger house on that block. And it turned out that Maria had already seen a 2-storey house emerging out of the earth in that location like a mushroom. She said it just was trying to come up, and eventually burst up out of the ground. So she knew what it was going to look like, including the timber pickets across the veranda at the front. It took many months to create a plan that we were happy with and which I knew would actually be built. And after 20 months of building, we moved in for Christmas 1992. So it's almost 30 years since we moved in, and I'm sitting in that house now. Over my 40 years as an architect, I always knew when a design would actually be built or still needed tweaking or discarding completely. Sometime after we were living in Creswick, Maria remembered that she and her sister, together with their 7 children, had travelled to Creswick to spend the day at the dinosaur park that used to be located here. They had stopped at the police station to ask for directions to the park, and the children started playing under the huge oak trees on the median strip. Maria had looked up the street, admired the beauty of the huge oaks, which reminded her of her childhood growing up in Europe, and thought, what a beautiful place. I would love to live in a place like this. And she was on the very street and looking towards the very cottage where we would be living about 6 years later. Another story, honouring the past, the Aura archetypal essences. Over 25 years ago, my wife Marie was shown that she had to develop her own range of homeopathic essences to assist her clients with their unwanted life patterns. She was told they would be archetypal essences, and she was guided in their development by Aura, who Maria called the spirit of the white star. This is the information that came with the essences. Now, I should say that in her practice, Maria used to give all different sorts of homeopathic essences to her clients, but they were the bark flower essences, Australian bush flower essences, gel essences, whatever the client needed. Maria would muscle test with kinesiology to see which one suited. And when she was told that she had to develop her own, she said, I don't know anything about archetypes. And her guide said, well, it's just like patterns. Archetypes are like patterns. And Maria said, oh, I know patterns. I'm working with my clients' patterns, life patterns all the time. So what is an archetype? Archetype means original model or prototype. From the time of our birth, we exhibit a set of patterns and inclinations with which to react to the situations life presents to us, and attitudes and emotions with which colour our responses. Are these patterns innate, inherited, or learned? We don't all react in exactly the same way, however. Different cultures and individuals within those cultures will react to universal life experiences in slightly different ways. Cultural conditioning. And many decades ago, I came across a story in a book. The book was called The Continuum Concept by Jean Liedloff. And she was travelling at that time in the Amazon, investigating the child rearing of the natives in the area, just to see if there was any difference between child rearing in those cultures compared to Western cultures. And she ended up writing a book about it. But in this one story, she'd gone on an expedition with 2 Italians who were searching for diamonds in the upper reaches of one tributary of the in the Amazon jungle. And they were in a huge dugout canoe. And when they came to a waterfall, they had to lift this heavy dugout canoe up and over the rocks and put it in the water up above the waterfall. And she stepped away from this process, and she wanted to take some photos of it. And she noticed that the two Italians were cursing and swearing and just were not happy to be in that situation with this cumbersome, heavy canoe, whereas all the Indian porters that they were employing were laughing, and if one of them got crushed by the canoe, he laughed even harder than all the others. And they were just having a great time. They loved every moment of it. And she suddenly realised these two different cultures, the European culture and the Indian culture, were both experiencing the same experience, the same situation, and yet their response was totally different due to cultural conditioning. And that story has stuck with me ever since, because that's when I realised that it doesn't matter what happens to us in our lives and who we meet in our lives. We may not necessarily have too much control over that, but we do have a choice of how we can respond or react to those situations and those people. And we can respond with conditioned responses, or we can respond with higher ideals. That's our choice, and that's where will becomes such a vital part of our lives. We have free will to choose an ideal archetype reflecting our highest potential or possibility, but archetypal behaviours are often habitual or compulsive with no conscious awareness or control. I can't help acting like this. That's just the way I always am. I don't know what's the matter with me, are all expressions reflecting this type of pattern. Many archetypes remain buried or unexpressed, latent archetypes. I never knew I had it in me, and where did that come from? Are often typical reactions to bizarre or unexplained behaviour on our part. Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychologist, stated that there are as many archetypes as there are typical situations in life. In his autobiographical book, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung wrote of how, when he was experiencing the most intense phase of his confrontation with the unconscious, he was encountering and communicating with numerous archetypal figures and beings. And that's exactly what happened with Maria. She would sense that there was a presence in her consulting room. They would announce themselves as the archetypal, basically an archangel of a particular essence. And she would open a bottle of brandy and they would just stand there and put their essence into it. And their pattern was put into that particular archetypal essence. And that ended up with 36 different beings came to her over a period of, well over 12 months, and explained who they were and how these essences could be used to help her clients. By experiencing archetypes, expressing the life force through a set of patterns or focus, we will potentially have a greater understanding of fellow travellers going through that same experience, and therefore a less judgmental attitude. The soul chooses parents who will guarantee certain types of experiences and opportunities that the soul needs in its development. Life will bring us the opportunities through universal law, like attracts like, to teach us what we need to learn. Each soul will generally experience the full spectrum of archetypes, and I've included there just an image with the 36 different archetypes that came through to Maria over that period. An animal's instinctive behaviour is directed by a species archetype. Humans potentially have free will to choose patterns of behaviour, animals don't. Each of us needs to assume responsibility for the choices we make and accept the consequences of those choices. Our choices lead us through experiences of certain limiting life patterns to a greater understanding. Life on Earth is a special opportunity to gain a growing awareness of the consequences of our thoughts, choices, and actions. And that's one of the bottles there, the free spirit archetype. Who judges our choices and the Oh, sorry, I've lost a little bit of my screen there. We do by our own standards based on cultural conditioning. We judge our own choices and their consequences. Pain and suffering usually indicate a judgment of a choice. We choose at the soul level to function within or experience the limitations of certain life patterns. We tune into that pattern, which is a lesser experience than one of wholeness or oneness. If we desire an experience of wholeness, we must attune to that state. Karma is an opportunity to correct a judgment, non-loving response to a loving witness response. We can use will to choose a loving witness response. Judgment is usually reacting from the compulsive and potentially destructive archetypal patterns of non-loving response. In our interactions with others, our archetypes are usually relating to their archetypes, not the real person. So if someone is being bitchy, that is probably an archetype, not the real person. The virtues such as healing and love are governed by archangels. Similarly, archangels govern the archetypes or life patterns which souls choose to experience in the earth for the purpose of learning and growth. Each archetypal pattern has its unique opportunities for the development, expression, and alignment of the will. Archetypal patterns are generally collective, not personal, and evolve as humanity evolves. For example, the ruler archetype, royalty, is evolving into inner rule. However, even though archetypes are common to all humanity, each person will experience them in their own unique way. By using archetypal essences, we become consciously aware of the archetypes at work in our lives. How can this help? Archetypal essences help identify the behaviours and attitudes that keep the soul from its truest expression. These behaviours are then no longer habitual or compulsive, and we gain conscious awareness and choice in how we wish to express these energies. The interesting thing one was when procrastinator essence came through, we were trialling it on ourselves, and we included our middle son as part of the trial. So the three of us, Maria, myself, and our middle son, trialed procrastinator essence, and for 2 whole days we just sat and couldn't do a thing. We truly did feel this experience of being a procrastinator, because that's what the essences were designed to do, to bring these patterns to conscious awareness. And it was just so almost debilitating to feel procrastinator to that extent. So that was a very interesting one. Okay, so that's the past. Now we're moving on to the future, creating the future, an understanding of quantum physics. Now, this is my understanding. Some time ago, I received a download of an image to help me understand some concepts from quantum physics. I'd been reading a book by Michael Talbot, The Holographic Universe, and I really wanted an understanding of how quantum physics worked. So this image that I downloaded was, I was shown a surfer riding a wave. The surfer represents you and me, and the surface of the ocean represents the day-to-day reality of our existence, the manifested universe. The wave is our present moment, with the past behind us and the future ahead of us. Below us lies the unmoving ocean depths, timeless and infinite. This represents the unmanifested universe, the potential that our consciousness can tap into and create a new reality. Implicate and explicate are concepts for quantum theory coined by theoretical physicist David Bohm during the early 1980s. The implicate, also referred to as the enfolded order, is seen as a deeper and more fundamental order of reality. In contrast, The explicate or unfolded order includes the abstractions that humans normally perceive as the material world. Bohm held the view that mind and matter are interconnected and that thought, mind, is non-localized, similar to quantum entities, and even felt that the mind was just a unity. There was just one mind in this whole universe. Erwin Schrödinger, another quantum physicist with the famous cat, Schrödinger's cat, also felt the same way, that there was just one mind in this whole universe. So how can we know the future? And the little cartoon here is quite funny about how some people can perceive the future and the rest of us can't. In 1982, I travelled to Brisbane to attend a 4-day international ARE conference organised by the Brisbane A Search for God groups. It's interesting, that was until we ran our conference here in 2019, that was the only other international conference we'd held in Australia. So there was, 37 years between conferences. One of the speakers was Lawrence Follis, an ARE member from New Zealand who was a hypnotherapist. During his talk, he shared a story about a young boy who suffered from asthma. In the hypnosis session, Lawrence described regressing him back to the causal lifetime to see if he could alleviate the asthma. In that lifetime, he was a young lad living in England and working in a coal mine where he led a pit pony pulling carts filled with coal out of the mine. He suffered with terrible lung problems, and I thought, oh, of course, this is where the asthma started. So did Lawrence. However, in progressing him forward to his death in that lifetime, he was healthy and was a passenger on a sailing ship on his way to meet his fiancée to be married. The ship was sunk in a storm, and his dying thought as he drowned was that he would never see his beloved again. That was the source of his asthma, which was incidentally alleviated by the hypnosis session. In his book Hypnosis and the Higher Self, published in 1980, Lawrence shares details of his sessions with subject Mark, who he regressed back to the days of Atlantis. In this fascinating exchange, the very nature of linear time is challenged. Lawrence, is hypnosis practiced? Mark, it is common, stops pain, so is used a lot to eliminate pain. Lawrence, are you familiar with any particular person who practices hypnosis? Mark, Keelan does it. He is in his 30s. Lawrence had a feeling that the use of hypnosis was something learned in the distant past, in this case possibly associated with Mark in a former life. So he asked Mark some questions about Keelan's appearance and their relationship in Atlantis. Then he pursued this very interesting line of questioning. Lawrence, has Keelan ever taken a subject back to a former life? Mark, no. He has used it to eliminate small complaints and give his body complete relaxation and get spiritual peace. Lawrence, does he know it can be done? Mark, yes, but he is more interested in controlling himself. Lawrence, has Keelan ever hypnotized you? Mark, yes. Lawrence, seek out such a time and go into the hypnotic state. Now speak to Keelan and tell him that I am speaking to him from the future 11,800 years from his time. Tell him that Atlantis and all its technology will be destroyed and disappear without trace. This suggestion was followed by a very long silence in which Mark showed from his facial expression that he was in a very agitated state. Lawrence, what has Keelan done? Mark, this is not possible, he says. Lawrence, what has happened? Mark, Keelan has gone off in a terrible rage. So it's just very interesting to think that time, as we know it, is all one time. It's all continuous. Did Cayce reading sometimes caution regarding the use of hypnosis? The condition aphonia might be corrected almost instantly by the use of hypnosis, or by a series of some 3 or 4 such treatments. Yet that overcoming that is necessary in the karmic influence of the body would not be met. Hence, we would use the hypnosis method only as a last resort, reading 2696-1. Okay, the Adjustment Bureau. I did mention this in my talk I gave last year, but because I think that it's such an important concept, I wanted to share it again and really stress the importance of it. Do we control our destiny, or do unseen forces manipulate us? That is the premise of one of my favourite movies, The Adjustment Bureau, 2011. A tale about a man who stumbles upon a vast, powerful and unseen world that exists on the periphery of our own. In the movie, a senior agent of the Adjustment Bureau, Richardson, tells Matt Damon's character David Norris, who had accidentally observed the Bureau at work, "You're seeing behind the curtain right now. You were never supposed to see this, but you have, and we're going to have to ask you to not ever tell anybody about this." In the readings, Edgar Cayce had this to say about the unseen forces or unseen influences. There comes to the entity those awakenings, those various conditions as transpire within the entity's own self, in the vibrations that are felt about the body, and the wonder comes. Are these vibrations as are experienced of the material making, or are they the presence of some unseen force from within that would find expression in the world? Or are they from unseen forces in another plane that seek a manner of expression in this plane? Reading 137-84. Know rather that the unseen influences in the experience of every soul are greater than those that are seen. Reading 1531-1. And another reading describes the purpose of these influences. There is that impetus in the activities of unseen influences to act upon the mental abilities and capacities of many individuals and groups in trying to bring to the greater masses that of harmony and peace from the chaos that has existed so long in the experience of many. Reading 282-5, and that particular reading could have easily been a description of the premise of this particular movie, The Adjustment Bureau. The following is taken from the background information to reading 3744-2, which is a series of readings on the subject of psychic phenomena. So it wasn't an actual reading, it was from the background. If we will but consider open-mindedly the effects of unseen forces upon the lives, we will do well for our own self-development and the development of others with whom we may come in contact. Man apparently knows very little of the unseen forces, yet he is daily affected by their action. This lack of knowledge is due largely to traditional superstition and our fear of the real truth. The more we really study of the dynamic power of forces unseen, the more we develop toward the higher realms of thought and realize how many things affect our destiny of which we have little or no knowledge. And another reading stresses the importance of our response to these influences. Hence, by some it may be termed one that is superstitious or giving or accrediting those powers or influences to unseen forces that may rule or act upon an entity. It is correct that these forces are activated in the experience, but what they become depends upon how the entity or an individual soul responds or reacts to same. It depends upon what one does about an urge as to what it makes, whether towards a constructive force or not. So it's our free will as to how we choose to respond to these influences. It's reading 858-1. And the final word is the reading by Edgar Cayce on choice or will. For man, an entity, an individual is not a pawn to be moved by unseen forces, but rather by the activity of force through choice, making the individual, for each individual is a portion of the great creative energy. And as to what that will be when returned to the whole is up to the individual. It's up to us. We're reading 341-27. Okay, how are we going for time? I don't actually have a clock anywhere on my screen.
You're good, Russell. You're good.
Okay. Creating the future, seek ye first the spirit within. Now, our Wednesday night study group is studying the ARE press book, The Intelligent Heart, by David MacArthur and Bruce MacArthur. This book expands on the understanding of universal laws described in Bruce MacArthur's wonderful book, Your Life, Why It Is the Way It Is, and What You Can Do About It. And our Wednesday night study group spent 5.5 years studying that particular book and applying the principles in it, the laws. And we've currently got a Tuesday night study group that's studying that book, and our Thursday night study group in Australia is studying A Search for God. And in the Wednesday night group, we're currently working with the law of seeking first. Seek first the spirit within, and all you have need of will be added. Seeking the spirit within has to be made a priority in our lives, our default position. The discipline we are to work with for this week is, during the week, let us explore in what ways and from the heart do we seek spirit first. So what do the Cayce readings have to say about the spirit within? Know what is thine ideal, not only material or mental, but most of all from the promptings of the spirit within, studying to show thyself approved, not only unto man, not only unto that of man's making, but unto thy maker. Reading 349-19. For the giver of all good and perfect gifts alone can bring the increase, can quicken the heart, can quicken the spirit within to bring fruit. Reading 1158-12. Who is to set a limit upon that as may be accomplished by the entity in the hearts and minds of men everywhere through keeping attuned or in accord with the knowledge of the spirit within that moves upon the influences from within as well as from without, to bring to pass the greater knowledge of the associations of creative forces in the lives and experiences of men. Reading 1486-1. This is very interesting, this one. The following was part of a reading given by Cayce, volunteered at the end of reading 254-69, which was a work reading for the ARE. It was given on the 9th of October 1933. Gertrude Cayce had already given the first paragraph of the waking suggestion, but what came through offers hope for the future of the evolution of humanity. There is felt, and it is gaining in its expression until many have gone off at tangents, that there is to be and is imminent a change in the whole world as to religious thought, a new ideal, a new purpose, a renewing of the spirit within. That must have really been inspiring to the group around Cayce when he gave that, 5756-9. So why is the spirit within so important? For whatever there may be is first conceived in spirit. It is acted upon by mind, dependent then upon what the mind of the entity holds as its ideal, or as to what form or manner it would give by and through what spirit it would build in its mental self. So first conceived in spirit. Reading 2995-3. And the Cayce reading suggests that whatever we manifest in our three-dimensional physical world is first created by the universal forces in the spiritual realms. And the following two readings were given for the ARE as an organisation. They're both 254 series readings. But I believe the same principle operates for anything that is manifested physically, mentally, or spiritually, even for two people creating a relationship. Know that all the laws as pertain to the activities are the same, and that what has come into materialization first has had its inception in the mental and the spiritual realm, and is as perfect a body in those realms, or the more perfect dependent upon the basis of the inception or the desire that has brought it into being, as it is in the material plane. and as has ever been given, those influences are the same in applying or in relationships to such organisations as about any individual or any individual organisation, and the same laws apply in same. Organisations, individuals, two people in a relationship, it's all the same. The laws are the same. As has been intimated and given, the combinations of efforts by individuals in a given direction, there is first the creation in the universal forces of the body-mind of such an organisation, no matter of what nature, be it physical, material, or for spiritual purposes. It grows to be, with the activities of such a group, association, combination, body-mind, and the purposes that you term soul, which is the stellar forces rather than its association or combination with such. Hence you speak of the spirit of America, of Germany, of the Nordic people, of the Mayan, of the Celtic, of whatnot. These are influences that have taken shape in the realms beyond matter, yet influence same, with as much of a body as the mind, the builder, has builded. The word inspiration can literally mean a divine influence or action on a person. So when we receive a download of information about a topic or feel inspired to create a masterpiece, be aware of the true source of that influence. And as I've shared before, when I was given the information about the board game Sojourns based on the Cayce readings, it was a download. I was shown everything about it, the shape of the board, the shape of the 6 lifetimes that had to be included. It's basically a reincarnation game. The movement around the board had to be with cards, which were to be called karma cards, which were paraphrased Cayce readings. There had to be 137 of these cards. I don't know why I was told that, but everything about it was a download, and all I had to do was then just create it, manifest it in the physical. But it was all given to me as a download of information. And finally, the Cayce readings identify the ultimate pattern or standard to set as our ideal. In manifesting in the present, just where should I draw the line between being a non-entity and expressing my individuality? Let the expressing be the individuality of the Christ rather than a personality or an individuality of self. Be selfless in Christ. 288:36, so that's Gladys. The pattern is in him, doing good, being patient, being loving in every experience of man's activity. 206:72. There is set an example, and by that example should one ever measure one's efforts as related to God or man, for he, being both God and man, can be truly the example for men to pattern their activities, their going in, their coming out. 311-5. For within the nucleus at conception is the pattern of all that is possible, and remember, man is nearer to limitless than anything in creation. 281:55. And what should be the standard of measurement in myself for choosing a life partner? That which is thine own standard, the Christ consciousness, the Christ life. Those who do not use that as their pattern are not in keeping with the better influences for creating those lives, those activities, those environs for the conscious development, for the betterment. 308:9. And my favourite pattern reading given for Tom Segru in May 1941 as he was preparing the manuscript of There Is a River. Should the Christ consciousness be described as the awareness within each soul, imprinted in pattern on the mind and waiting to be awakened by the will of the soul's oneness with God? Correct. That's the idea exactly. 574914. And just to remind everyone, something that we're so familiar with, but that so spirit is the life, as the life force, the life energy. Everything is first created in spirit, then mind is the builder, the patterner, and then the physical is the result. Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present tonight, or this morning for me. It's mid-morning in Australia on Saturday morning, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, especially the next talk, which will be presented shortly by Cayce. So thank you again.